Right, I think we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the PFLA's very first webinar. We've got nearly 100 people registered for this webinar, which is absolutely great, and really amazed at the uptake, which is fantastic. We've got nearly 40 people joined us so far, so I guess a few people might still be logging in. So to find, hopefully you're familiar with Zoom software already. This is our first webinar trying out the webinar software, so please bear with us if it doesn't run completely smoothly, but we think we've got a grasp of it and have speakers that are very familiar with it as well. You should see within your screen, hopefully you can see the screen that I'm sharing now, which is just a title slide, but you should also see an ability to chat, a sort of chat function down in the right-hand side normally. If you can't see it at the moment, it's probably via a little button on the bottom. Feel free to pop any notes or questions in there as we go. So Laura Elliott is here from the PFLA office. She's going to keep an eye on monitoring the chat for any questions that we need to pull out or any problems that any of you might be having with different things on there. So, and I can already see Lupo's on the call and it's all coming through loud and clear, which is reassuring to hear. Thank you, Lupo. And we've still got a few more people joining. So, hope you're all well and good wherever you are. I know we've got people joining us from all over the UK, potentially in Ireland as well. The topic we're talking about today, the new environmental land management scheme, is principally of importance to England at the moment, but it definitely has some relevance to the other nations as well. And I know our speakers will be touching on that a little bit. We are recording this webinar for your information. Your videos won't be showing up because you're currently muted and not showing on camera, but just please bear that in mind. It will be recorded, and that's so that we can share it with members that are unable to make it here this evening and want to be able to follow what's happening in the future. So I just to say that we're going to try and stick to the hour today. I'm trying to move my slide on. There we are. So we've got Jenny Phelps from FWAG to talk to us a little about some more background to ELMS, because she really understands so much more than I do and is been quite involved and working with Defra now for quite some time. And she's going to give us some background and also some details about some of the test and trials projects that she's working on. Followed by Jenny will be Adele Jones from the Sustainable Food Trust, talking about some of her work and again the test and trial they're involved with. And an important point we want to sort of bring out in perhaps some discussion and part of the Q&A is really how we can, as a PFLA community, help to influence the development of ELMS going forward and help to share our experience from pasture-fed livestock farms and how future policy could be crafted to help incentivize good grassland management, which we know within the PFLA helps deliver public goods, be that biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water infiltration, water retention, that sort of thing. All things that we need to learn more about, but as a community of members and farmers, we can work together to raise the profile of those important aspects. And then hopefully time for some Q&A. We will aim to be finished by 6 o'clock, but if the Q&A is going well and our speakers are happy to continue fielding any questions, then we will do our best to do that. Just before we kick off with Jenny, we wanted to ask a quick poll, which I'll ask Laura to launch now, which should come up on your screen and allow you to click. And we're asking you what your level of understanding is about ELMS currently. And so you can just tick there whichever you think best represents your understanding to date. And that will just help us pitch what we're going to pitch in the next hour at a sort of appropriate level. So just tick the option, then click submit. And then I think, or we think, Laura will see that the results come in, she will then be able to show us what the results look like. Do let me know otherwise, or Laura, speak up if there's, tell us how it's going or how many you've had in so far. I think you're on mute at the moment.
Okay, yeah, 86% have voted so far. Mainly a little bit.
Right, okay.
But no,
Can you present that as a chart or anything? You don't have to. I thought it was possible. Don't worry if not. We can carry on. So 86% have voted. Most people are saying they know a little bit, which is fine. We can work with that. And we've got your screen up now.
Or you've got everything else in there.
Great. Well, we'll carry on, and that's really useful to know. I thought it was worth just saying that we have put in some proposals from the PFLA to Defra to run a test and trial to try and understand how we could get grassland management techniques embedded within future ELMS policy. We haven't been successful in getting that through with Defra so far, but that was around sort of pathways to transition. And I think we can probably bring some of that out in the discussions with Jenny and Adele and the discussions later. And I'll let Jenny explain a little bit more about the background to ELMS, but essentially it could be a really important function for pasture for life farmers in helping to recognise and measure public goods that are delivered as a replacement really for countryside stewardship measures that are going to be part of the new domestic agriculture policy now that we've left the common agriculture policy or in the process of leaving. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jenny to take the stage, so to speak, and she's going to share her screen and take us through it. So over to you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just sharing my screen now, so you should be able to see it presently. You know? We'll try again. Technology works well when it works.
It worked earlier.
Yeah. Okay. We should be there, hopefully.
Great. Yes.
Marvellous. Okay. Thank you ever so much. It's a real privilege to talk to the PFLA. I have huge respect, and I obviously know the workings quite well because Russ is our lodger and has been here for a good few years now. We've been following the PFLA and the amazing things you've been teaching us a lot. So hopefully a lot of what I'll talk about today has been inspired by your work. So thank you very much. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and hopefully this will work well for you. So basically, we've been running an ELMS trial. So I'm on the Environmental Land Management Scheme Advisory Board for Defra. So we've been part of a group for nearly 2.5 years now. And we were quite keen to be a contributor towards ELMS because we have found it just quite scary, the impact, the loss of basic payment scheme and the whole potential changing in support mechanisms for farming. And we've been involved for over 10 years now in lots of projects that we've been trying to feed into Defra about the importance of valuing farming and local knowledge. And so our ELMS trial really built on nearly 10 years worth of pilots and projects that we're involved with, which has evolved from the catchment-based approach through payments for ecosystem services, community resilience projects, farmer group projects, and we're very lucky because we're supported now by 3 really large academic research projects, which includes the NERC funded Landwise project, the AgLand project which CH from Rothamsted are doing, and the Robust project, which is doing things around circular economy. So we really felt that it was important, vitally important really, to create an opportunity to be part of ELMS. And I think we are proposal 22 of what I think is 40 different tests and trials that are taking place. So I'm going to run you through.
Jenny, right, yeah. I'll just ask, is it possible you to put it on presentation mode?
I have tried, but it didn't work.
Right,
I'll try again. Oh,
Apologies.
there we go. Perfect. There we go. So trying twice is always good. So one of the things that's really interesting now is the fact that the policy is moving forward really, really quickly, and our ELMS trial is starting to feed into what we hope will be some really amazing opportunities around helping food resilience, embed food resilience post-COVID. We'll create some structure around a post-Brexit policy, which is what ELMS is all about, but also help with climate emergency response. And all of the projects that we use an integrated framework, which is based around basically enabling local farmers and communities to take action and have their knowledge valued and their governance and guardianship of the land that they own and they farm to be a key part of delivering against those agendas. But quite often what happens is there's lots of different strategic partners, and they are sort of like the complexity around the governance of what all those partners are trying to do becomes very complicated. And what quite often is missed is the essential role of the land management and all the amazing things that people are doing. So what we're trying to do is help not only promote that and help people to take action in climate emergencies and post-COVID response, but also to make sure they benefit from a coordinated partnership support. So as part of our ELMS trial, what we were trying to do was build on an international case study that we have been running now since 2013, about demonstrating the benefit of farmland in building resilience to communities. And this is directly about how we as farmers and farm advisors and people who manage the land have got a huge role to play in building resilience. And so we wanted to sort of build on that part of our ELMS trial to be able to show again is all that research many times to the policymakers that this is a really good way of moving forward, valuing the functionality of land and the people that look after it. So our trial included 20 phase 1 farmers from the Thames, 30 control farmers who didn't get the support, which I'll talk about in a minute, 5 communities and 10 stakeholders from the catchment partnership, but that directly linking into our county-based local nature partnership and our local enterprise partnership, which is linking directly into the other policy frameworks that are coming on around economy and net gain and all those other things, which I'll explain later on. So what we want to do under our trial was to create a platform for natural capital recording, so that if we're going to have an opportunity to be funded for public goods, we need to have a mechanism by which we can understand how those public goods can be assessed and attributed function, and actually be able to create a common platform from which we can all work. And so we were lucky enough to be able to partner up with the Land app, who has got a very, very dynamic mapping tool, which some of you may be familiar with, but very, very lucky to also have the full support of Ordnance Survey and lots of other partners in their sort of digital technology and GIS mapping to be able to help us do that. We also wanted to demonstrate to government the cost benefit and the benefit of enabling people to take action if they're supported by advisors. And that's not just to try and create a role for FWAG, that's about helping to unpick the complexity of governance and be able to be a conduit for funding and blended finance from public, private and third sectors to enable people on the ground to be able to feed up to people what they want to do on their land and have investment coming from all those different sources and delivering all those multiple agendas. So what the ELMS trial itself feeds directly into the objectives of Defra, which has got these 6 different thematic working groups in their ELMS priorities, as they call them. What I'm going to try and do is go through and to show you how our trial fits within that ambition. So the 6 themes are obviously creating land management plans. They want to explore the role of advice. They want to talk about innovative mechanisms. How will we prioritise this new environmental land management scheme? How can we facilitate collaboration? And what will the payments look like? And at the moment, they've put out in February, I think, or maybe January, the discussion paper around where they've got to with this. And some of that had support from the ELMS advisory group, but there was quite a lot of criticism from the ELMS advisory group that the discussion paper they put out didn't really represent a lot of the view of the people within that group. But the principles now that seem to be reasonably well established within the ELMS design is there'll be this tier 1, which will be available to all farmers, a tier 2, which might look like landscape collaboration across catchments, farmer groups, and then this sort of national investment opportunities to deliver wider, probably climate emergency responses. So we wanted to show how we could deliver against this with our trial. So this rather complex slide, please don't be too put off by it, because I will explain it again later on, is the fact that what we knew was this, whatever we create has to justify an investment equivalent to basic payment scheme. We know that our farming community will be seriously challenged by the reduction in basic payment scheme, and we want to create a justification for a mechanism that government can see the benefit of investing in our land, in our farming and food production systems, that has a real role to play as farmers and communities as part of that partnership. It needs to be simple, forward-facing to farmers, so that they can understand simple, the way that they're getting on with their land management and what they're doing is actually is being recognised, and that the functionality is contributing to us being able to deliver into other policy frameworks around things like local nature recovery strategies, and we can start to create collaborations around delivering other policies around net gain. And this is the way that we've sort of designed our trial, is to fit very much into those 6 themes: land management plans, advice and guidance, collecting data, looking at innovative mechanisms around how we can look at attribution of function of the landscape, including food production, and then how we can collaborate to create blended finance to be able to show how that investment can go back to the land to deliver all the functionality that we need, and as a partnership to be able to deliver. Part of our land management plan was, as I said, was to try and create this platform, and we were very lucky that we'd recently been trained in something called UK habitat mapping, which is a really new, only been out for about 18 months, way of being able to assess the land that is really clever, and I'll explain briefly in the presentation about what that is. But what it does is it enables us to have a common baseline from which we can assess the land, so that we can actually start to look at the functionality of it. And because we were supported by Ordnance Survey and we were working with the Land app, we were able to start to work with farmers in our trial to look at how their land might be able to be mapped for UK habitat mapping. So what the UK habitat classification does is it's a hierarchical mapping system that basically can take all of the way that we've previously mapped our land, whether that's for agri-environment schemes or for farm environment plans or phase 1 habitat surveys or national vegetation classifications. And we can actually translate all of that into one simple way that can code the land use, not only the land use habitat type, but the way that it's managed. And why it's really clever is that it goes down sort of hierarchy from a simple land use type down to more complex assessment of the land. And it does that by accumulating simple codes that attribute that habitat type to your land. So it starts off with these sort of 8 broad, 8 or 9 broad habitat classifications. But why it's really clever is it includes urban, peri-urban and cropland. So why we wanted to do that was because in 2013 we were involved with the Payments for Ecosystem Services pilots. We know that government has already agreed and had research that it can prove that habitats, different habitats, deliver different functions and ecosystem services. So we felt that if we could create a habitat mapping platform, we could go back and say, well, actually, look, you've already done this work to Defra to say that this is how the land can actually deliver against provisioning cultural and regulating services. And also for us, it was really important because this mechanism enables us to produce food as part of that, rather than just delivering the wider public goods, which there was a lot of debate about whether food was a public good or not. So it was essential for us to be able to produce food. So what basically happens is you start off with your level 1, which is your grassland, and then you're able, if you're able yourself as a farmer or maybe with a specialist, you can then look at the habitat type and you can say, is it acid grassland, is it calcareous grassland, and then you can key down to what that habitat type is, which is incredibly, which is very simple and very clever, and enabled you to have a whole linear equation basing around a lot of information on what is in that habitat type. And then basically, it also includes all the ability to assess arrowland and cropland. It can be code out all the options for sort of bird mixes and all the different types of way that we manage land, quite similar to our basic payment scheme. And we can now translate all our basic payment scheme codes into UK habitat mapping. We can also add in other features, so we can have a code for ponds or woodlands or orchards, and we can also add in secondary codes around whether things are planted and how things work. Primarily super exciting is that we can actually code out how something is managed. So now we can not only code the land, but we can also get some detail around how it's managed. And also that includes all the linear features, that's hedgerows and all of these other different features that we would normally put through other different mapping systems. what you end up with is this amazing opportunity to be able to map your land in a way that has got a huge amount of data, but actually in a simple form that can actually be used in a way that can actually start to attribute that ecosystem service function based around that. And we've got those really big research projects looking at trying to attribute function based around carbon, water infiltration, biodiversity, pollinators, all those different functionality, and obviously food provisioning. So through our trial, we ended up with some fantastically beautiful habitat maps. So this is Henry Robinson's, and actually started to be able to realise that we were creating an opportunity for investment in Tier 1, because what we learned was that under the Duty under the Environment Act of a lot of the local authorities will have this duty to recover these, to deliver local nature recovery strategies. And all of the data that is being used for producing those county-based maps for nature recovery networks, or as I say, the local nature recovery strategies that will come the duty, is all unverified. It's all in those sort of different forms that I was mentioning earlier that actually are all historic data. There's no real evidence as to whether or not those habitats still exist or the quality of them. So what we learned quite quickly was this creates a huge opportunity for us as the farming community to feed in real data to the local authorities and to different support payment mechanisms, and create platforms for trading. Excuse my dogs in the background. And so that we were suggesting that effectively you could, oh, something's popped up on my screen, I'll just get rid of that, that we thought under Tier 1 that actually an annual habitat map submission, where you could get paid to actually do that data submission, but also you could also get paid for water and boundary grants and things like that, was far better than having some sort of broad and shallow sort of catchment sensitive farming type capital grant scheme, which is what Tier 1 had already been suggesting. And we felt that this was really important, that this could underpin Tier 2, where you start to create these farmer collaborations across the landscape. Oh, my slides stopped a second, hang on. Just going to take it out. It stopped. Well, it's all going too well, Russell. I'm going to stop sharing and start sharing again. That's
okay, yeah, try that.
Okay.
That's strange.
It does it sometimes. It's to do with.
There we are.
Yeah, I'm back, but I'm on the same slide. Hang on. Let's just do it one more time. If I move it on the slide, I can show you what I'm. It's just. Okay, I'm going to put it back onto that one.
Or unless you do it outside of presentation mode.
Yeah. Sorry, technology's being challenged.
Brave new world, we're all learning.
It's okay. It works really well when it works. Can you see it now?
It's coming.
Yeah? You see it now?
There we are, yeah.
So basically what that gives, apologies for that, but what that does is that gives us an opportunity for us to then start to collaborate across the landscape, and to be able to get lots of farmers to be able to work together, to be able to attribute their function of their land, and actually for us to start to do assessments that how that land is provisioning and providing provisioning, regulating and cultural services. So I'm going to see if I can get it to go on. Right, perfect. I'm going to just keep it in that mode if that's okay. So what was really interesting about our trial also was we were then able to work with 5 communities with those farmers and start to look at how this might link into building neighbourhood planning maps that might start to look at how we could actually start to build resilience, you know, food resilience, flood resilience. And actually what was interesting is that the land on the right hand side of this map is unverified. We were able to pull in the Nature Recovery Network unverified maps and start to show how the farmers could really, and land managers could really make a contribution to helping to the state of the environment. So why we felt that was really important is that it builds on this case that we're trying to make for investment in farmland, and building on the case studies that we've got about building community resilience, which are now international case studies. So through the ELMS trial, we were able to demonstrate very much that actually, you know, this is a key element that was missing, that if you want to deliver environmental sustainability going forward, then we as farmers and managers have a key role to play. So this is a picture of our local nature recovery network. It actually is how the environment is actually now being mapped. And as I say, we have had a huge amount of interest from all of the different organisations that we've worked with that this role of farmers submitting and verifying this data is hugely important. But what it does also is it creates an opportunity for us to have a platform from which we can start to blend finance. So we can effectively take those local nature recovery strategies, we can then verify that data, and we can create opportunities for building investment in that natural capital, so that we can start to be able to look at how lots of different organisations and individuals can invest in that natural capital recovery and those and that resilience planning. And obviously that will help with post-COVID, it will help with post-Brexit alignment, but it will also help with climate change emergencies. So we're already delivering for a lot of these different mechanisms you can see on the right hand side. So the UK Habitat Map being the foundation for an environmental land management scheme would be ideal. We can then collect data that can actually look at how we can include and have volunteer action. We've had over £250,000 worth of volunteer contribution in our 20 communities we've worked with in the last 5 years. We can create a platform for delivering net gain and biodiversity sort of like mechanisms that are coming on board with the Environment Act. And we can deliver for payments for ecosystem services, so we can actually start to work with water companies and deliver natural flood management, and start to do carbon trading and carbon payments, and that will actually help collaborate all around those different ways that we can actually assess the landscape with that habitat mapping codes attribute function and build that opportunity for shared collaboration and investment. So the bit that's super exciting to me is the fact that if we get this right, and a lot of people within Defra, we've been doing presentations across Defra, we're part of a webinar series now that has over 1,000 people on it, is that there's a real opportunity for us to take elements of the agriculture bill and the environment bill and start to see whether or not, as a platform that we've created, that you could start to create payment mechanisms. That means that you could potentially have food as more affordable for society, because we could start to pay for the functionality of the land while attributed by the different way that it's managed. So these are lovely pictures, as we know, from Cotswold Seeds. But the example that we've given at the bottom here, with the chickens, comes from Abbey Home Farm, who I don't know if John's on the line or Hilary or Will, but what the challenge is in the food industry and in procurement of local food is that there's sort of this food injustice, that a lot of people can't afford to buy food that is produced in a way that's regenerative and healthy and in keeping with the soil management and biodiversity and water quality and all these things. So if we can actually create a platform for mechanisms for investment through ELMS that actually is quantified and evaluated by academic organisations such as CH and Rothamsted, that are actually delivering projects that have been requested by government to start attributing these functions, we might end up with a situation where we could actually pay farmers for carbon and water and flooding and biodiversity, so that the actual price of the food that comes from those landscapes becomes more affordable for all. And in that, we're now starting to build through directly from our ELMS trial into trying to do pilots around dynamic procurement systems, which are going to be trialling whether local authorities could buy school meals and hospital meals that come from regenerative sources, and that whether we can link the functionality of the land to the other duties that the local authorities have and other departments across government, so that the one land that we have is actually valued for its functionality. And that this is what our ELMS trial and our UK Habitat Mapping platform has enabled us to explore. And so there's some really exciting things going on. And what we'd really like to do, if it's possible, is to explore with the PFLA very much about whether or not that's something that you'd like to get involved with. So really, to sort of show you just what that complex slide looked like at the beginning, and I've nearly finished now, is to show you that what we're trying to do is to explain to all these people who have multiple different strategies and multiple different agendas that actually there is only one land and one farm and one catchment and one county, and actually all of that needs to align for us to be able to do that. And regenerative farming is the foundation of that, and those of us who are guardians of that landscape know that better than anyone. But what we need to do is to be able to create a mechanism by which that can become the platform that everybody can invest in for that public benefit and resilience and food supply chains and economic recovery post-COVID and delivering climate emergencies. And if we do that in a structured way at an integrated local level, that actually we can all play our part in a climate change response, and that can actually make us look after the piece of the world that we care about, but enable and facilitate investment from multiple different opportunities that will be coming our way. So we've been told that because we've been lucky enough that our ELMS trial, we've completed our first 6 months of our ELMS trial, we've written our report, it's available to everyone. The second phase is for us to share and with people like yourselves, you know, is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Do you think this platform works? You know, is it a good basis for trying to achieve some of these amazing things around food justice and environmental recovery and regenerative farming? We've certainly had a huge amount of feedback so far from across academic and government sectors that they think it is a really good foundation, but we would welcome your feedback and your input as to what we've done and to see whether or not you think it's a good way forward, because certainly Defra seem to be very supportive at the moment. We can't guarantee that's the way it's going to go, but we're certainly trying to make a case for that investment and those mechanisms to be produced and aligned around that sort of thinking. Thank you very much. I think that's me, Russ. Is that okay?
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenny. And
sorry about the glitch in the middle.
That's fine. An awful lot to take in there. And I'd say to any members listening, if you have any questions at this stage, just pop them into the chat function. We'll come back to those at the end or in the Q&A function. And actually what Jenny's been talking about is a test and trial that she's looking at, but there are, we think, around 50 others taking place around the country. And one of which is something that Adele Jones is involved with, and just bear in mind there's lots of these other projects going on which some of you may also be involved with, but we'll come back to talking about that, and do drop any questions into the chat and Laura will keep an eye on that. So Adele from the Sustainable Food Trust, over to you.
Thank you, Russ. Let me just share my screen. Is that working okay?
Yep, great.
Perfect, and then I'll put it on full screen mode. Brilliant. Well, yeah, as Russ said, well, firstly, just to introduce myself, I'm Adele and I'm head of programs at the Sustainable Food Trust. For those who don't know, the SFT is a small charity working to unlock the barriers currently preventing a more mainstream transition to more sustainable and regenerative food systems. And I wanted to talk today, hopefully to build and complement a lot of what Jenny has just said. As Russ just mentioned, we are another one of the Elm Testing Trial projects, but we recognise that, you know, there are a significant number of them operating across the country now, and actually, unless we all start to join up these projects, there's no way that Defra are going to really take on board 50 or, you know, even 80 different proposals from different organisations. So what we're trying to do as much as possible, and Jenny and I are definitely working on this at the moment, is try to join up some of these ideas, because we're all working on different parts of the puzzle and we need to bring that kind of puzzle together. The difficulty is we don't have the picture quite on the back of the box yet, but I think we can all try and build it together, and I think that's what's so exciting at the moment, is this opportunity to kind of co-design the blueprints for the food systems of the future. And so what I wanted to talk about today is ELMS and the need for harmonised metrics, mainly in the context of the fact that we need to all make the case to Defra to support sustainable regenerative farming, but unless we have a common understanding of what good looks like, and, you know, we as this, you know, community we're talking this evening, we might have a common understanding of what good looks like, but you can bet your bottom dollar that Defra don't quite know what that is, and certainly a lot of other farmers around the country. So if we can encourage harmonisation of the way we measure success and measure sustainability across the whole of the farming system, we're really hoping that will play an important part in moving the whole industry in the right direction. So, I mean, I don't need to preach to you guys because I know you're totally aware of this, but there's, you know, so many different farm assurance schemes, sustainability assessments out there, and it's confusing both for farmers who might be subjected to quite a number of these each year to access certain markets or grant support schemes from the government. It's also, you know, confusing for consumers. There's a lot of research out there showing that Although some consumers might come to know and trust labels, they don't necessarily know what they mean. For example, Red Tractor is, one of the kind of trusted ones in the UK, but when you look at some of the research about how much consumers really know about it, it's pretty limited. And I think it is a bit smoke and mirrors with some of these things, and greater transparency in the marketplace is something that is becoming quite a hot topic at the moment. So I think there's a place for farm assurance schemes and labels as a method of gaining consumer trust and compliance. But I think there's a bit of kind of a transparency piece of work that needs to go on to make sure that people really have the opportunity to understand what's behind some of these labels. So we thought this is actually a conversation that started about 5 years ago, so kind of predating any sort of Brexit discussions. We sat down with a group of farmers and said, okay, well, what do you supply to different people each year? Pasture for Life being one of them, Red Tractor, Leaf, Soil Association, your BPS, your stewardship, your kind of milk records, all these sorts of things. We said we did a big gap analysis with a group of farmers and said, what do you supply, and is it useful? Does it help you improve your businesses year on year in terms of economic performance, but also sustainability? And I think the resounding answer from the group of farmers who represented quite a broad church of scales and sizes was that no. It's largely kind of someone coming around with a clipboard and a big red pen saying, you've done this, or you've got this, you've got your organic certification this year. Thank God for that. It doesn't actually tell you if your soil husbandry was any better than it was last year, or if your water quality was up 5 points from last year, which surely is the kind of information that we all we're all wanting to know now. So we thought, okay, what would be the case for harmonisation, and the points here describe that, hopefully. And obviously we're talking about this from a government perspective. So how could a harmonised set of farm level metrics, I suppose analogous to the financial accounting standards, whereby there's an independent body which sets accounting standards around the world. Doesn't matter if you're a small business, big business, individual, you're all operating under the same framework, which gives everything consistency, comparability. It translates across the different countries, regions. And yet it also allows for, the big four management consultancies to operate, software companies, accountants, auditors. They all operate really healthily in this space underneath a common framework. And if everyone was using a different framework for measuring financial accounts, we'd be in a terrible mess. So, and that's kind of what's happening with sustainability, particularly on farms at the moment. So in terms of Defra, how could a harmonised set of sustainability metrics for measuring on farm, how could this kind of help their cause? And as many of you might know, there's lots of things being developed in Defra at the moment. There's the ELMS scheme, there's the 25-year environment plan, there's a new regulatory regime for farming once we leave the EU, there's enhanced animal welfare payments, and of course there's also nutrition and public health, which is a total silo off on its own, but actually really needs to be brought back into this conversation. And so if we did encourage them to take a harmonised approach, we could, rather than having different teams within Defra developing different sets of indicators and metrics, which I can tell you is definitely happening right now, which is a bit worrying, we need to encourage them to take a kind of a harmonised approach, so they have one way of measuring sustainability on farms and delivering that through the new schemes, and one way of communicating that to the public in terms of the benefits that farmers are providing and the public goods they are delivering. So we sat down with this same group of farmers that I talked about just a moment ago and said, okay, well, let's look at everything you're doing at the moment, and what's the kind of commonality here? What's the differences, and what do you think should form a harmonised framework of assessment? And so they came up with these 10 categories, ranging from obviously productivity, profitability. Farmers are, most farmers are business people. It's very important, and there's no point thinking about, changing your biodiversity or your soil unless you can have a view on how that's going to impact your business as well. So we thought that was important to have in there. And it goes to soil, livestock management, resource use, efficiency, and also the kind of social and cultural aspect of farming as well. And underneath each of those categories, we challenged ourselves to narrow down our thoughts into 3 key metrics and indicators under each one. So for soil, for example, we've got soil organic matter, soil structure and infiltration rate, and biodiversity measured through earthworms. That's quite a practical category. In some of the other ones, like livestock management, we've got the management system, diversity, health and welfare, nutrition, input efficiency. So, there's lots that can come under that, but we try to narrow it down into 3 categories so as not to try and overwhelm Defra with different metrics and to keep it quite simple. And what we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years is basically testing that framework and getting feedback from farmers all over the country on what works, what doesn't work, which metrics are useful to them, which, are total jargon. And actually, the feedback's been fantastic because it's almost like having one of those smart meters installed in your house. Until you have it there, installed on your wall, and you can see where how much energy and electricity you're using, and also possibly it tells you what would happen if you turned your lights off and that sort of thing. It's really hard to visualize what you can do to do better unless you've kind of got a graph in front of you that you can see is changing each year. So we've had some really great feedback from the farmers. But most importantly, I wanted to mention is that we haven't designed this sustainability framework around a whole new set of indicators and metrics. What we've tried to do is take the bits that take all the information that farmers are supplying to all these different people each year. So obviously Pasture for Life, we've got a soil association, we've got the Cool Farm Tool, we've got the GWC Big Farmland bird count, because if farmers are already collecting this information for these various people, then why not find a way of feeding it into one kind of centralized place? And therefore, if let's say you do 3 of these things, 3 of these logos on this slide, actually you probably would pre-populate 60 or 70% of the assessment because the information is already there. And so we've been working with these different organizations to try and look at where there's opportunities to harmonize. And therefore, we're not looking to create another assessment, which would be a headache for farmers, but instead look at what we can do to build on what's already there. Because much of the Pasture for Life certification, I was having another look at it again this morning, feeds directly into what we feel should be a harmonized framework for sustainability assessment. And on that note, that's where we kind of came to Defra, and we said, well, we've been doing this work and we have this idea of Defra potentially leading the harmonization of this assessment. What would it look like for the ELMS scheme to require an annual sustainability assessment based on these 10 indicators? Of course, taking things like the UK habitat mapping that Jenny mentioned as well. We're hoping to put that into the biodiversity category of what we're doing, and submit that information to Defra on an annual basis, and then Defra can kind of decide then how, where your money should be distributed in terms of the public goods you're delivering. So that's the premise of our ELM trial, is to test the idea of an annual sustainability assessment based on harmonized metrics and indicators, not because we feel like Defra should be hitting people with a stick if they don't deliver certain outcomes that they might want to. For example, increasing their soil organic matter by 1% each year or something like that, because actually, there's many factors that might hinder that, and we wouldn't want farmers to be kind of losing out on potential payments by getting too stuck on some of that detail. But rather, if farmers can show using an annual sustainability assessment that they're moving in a positive direction of travel, it's, using the smart meter analogy again, it's then providing that that baseline to know where you're starting from and where you might want to get to, and just providing that transparency as a farm business to see where you could do better and where you're actually really excelling at the moment. Let's go forward. So we are running our Elm Testing Trial on 30 farms across the UK, and actually we're hoping to link up with some of the farms that Jenny's been working with as well to increase that number. They're spread around England. Unfortunately, Defra is quite strict on us not spending money in Wales, Scotland or Ireland, which is a bit mean in my opinion, but we're working on other ways to kind of move it across into those devolved nations. So we're doing this trial over the next few weeks. We thought with the lockdown we might have to postpone everything because the researcher we're working with, some of you might know him, Dr. Lawrence Smith from the RAU, he was going to go to all the farms and help them do the assessment, which I should say is a self-assessment largely, but we're not hung up on self-assessment being the only way forward because there's some farmers who might need a bit more help with a farm advisor. So we wanted to design something which could work as a self-assessment, but also for those who want a bit more help could also sit down with a farm advisor and complete it as well. So Lawrence was going to go to the farms and help them complete the assessment, which I just should say is a kind of upgrade on the PG tool, which I know many of you have done already, because Lawrence was the one who developed the PG tool. And we thought that was a great template to work from, but it needed quite a lot of updating and improving. So that's what we've been working to do over the last few months, which I'll show you in a second, actually. Yeah, I will show you that. I'm just going to show you that now. How do I move you? Okay, so this is the kind of updated PG tool, just to give you a bit of a idea of. The Zoom pictures are all in the way. Okay, so this is just an example. It's the biodiversity section of the tool, and you put in. We're looking at agricultural.
Doing for us, Adele, yeah.
Oh no, is it not?
No.
How do I? Oh, maybe I have to unshare and share it again. 2 seconds.
Yeah, maybe try that. Yeah.
Screen. Okay, can you see it now?
Yep.
Cool. So this is the kind of updated PG tool, although it's strictly not called the public goods tool anymore. But we've got a mixture of agricultural diversity because we felt that biodiversity often misses out the agricultural biodiversity, which I know you will all be quite passionate about. So the genetic diversity of your livestock and also the seed and crop varieties that you're growing as well. So we've got some data entry points on that side of things. We've also got this farm habitat section, which we're hoping to actually update. Oh no, I think this is based on the UK HAB definitions, but I think we're gonna try and integrate that further so that it's really clear that those two areas of Jenny and I's trial overlap. And then we've got the Cool Farm tool here in case any farmers already complete the Cool Farm tool. We wouldn't want them to replicate that. So if you've done that, that will pre-populate here. And again, the big farmland bird count, we don't want to set up a new farmland bird count when GWCT have been doing such a good job already. So what this is really trying to do is pull everything together in one place and harmonise with these organisations as much as possible. So that's just a really quick rundown of that. And then I just wanted to say from a Welsh perspective, is it back on my PowerPoint again now?
No, not yet. Not for me, at least. It seems to have frozen.
Weird. Okay, let me do it again.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as I said, obviously we're doing this Defra testing trial for England, for Defra, but we're really passionate about making sure that Wales, Scotland and Ireland also kind of join into this conversation. I'm actually currently working for the Welsh Government 2 days a week on something they are calling the Farm Sustainability Review, which is a fantastic proposal to introduce an annual sustainability assessment based on harmonised metrics and indicators, which we may or may not have had something to do with them introducing, but we're really excited about it. And I think, to be completely honest, I think the Welsh Government is steps ahead of Defra in terms of thinking about regenerative agriculture, whole farm plans, etc. So I think they are a kind of, watch this space government at the moment, but just to say that these sorts of conversations are happening there as well. This is just some of you may have seen this article that was in Farmers Guardian. This is about, March. This was a March issue, so a few weeks ago. And we were talking about how the framework could be used, not just from a farm management perspective, but also from a trade perspective, and also potentially as a method of increasing transparency in the marketplace, which is something I mentioned at the beginning. And this is just a very crude diagram that I put together to show that, wouldn't it be interesting that alongside the Pasture for Life label and the leaf label, let's say, you could have some sort of harmonized score that showed you how the farm is doing in these various aspects, and it would need to obviously be slightly simplified so that consumers could easily kind of make a judgment about whether or not that was something they want to buy. But I think, as Jenny said, if we need to start incentivizing the kind of positive public goods if we are going to make sustainable farming and regenerative farming the best business case. And until we can, obviously encourage governments to introduce policies to drive that change, but at the same time also try and utilize the market to encourage more consumers to buy food, which is obviously better in these categories. I think that's the challenge ahead, really. And I think it's really interesting what's happened over the last few weeks with, the supermarkets and perhaps increased demand for local food. I think there's a new report out from the Food Foundation which shows that demand for veg boxes has increased by 111% over the last 4 or 5 weeks, which is really interesting. And I think we can kind of use this time to reflect and think how we can help consumers make better decisions. So I think that's me, I think. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adele. Another really interesting project, and it's great to see that's bringing together lots of other discussions that we're all having and recognising the value of existing schemes as well. So I'm conscious of time, but we will try and answer as many questions as we've got. You've probably got some specific questions for Adele and Jenny, and there's been a few popping up in the Q&A box already. And then it'd be good to really have a think about any relevant questions for how the PFLA and what the Pasture for Life scheme represents can be presented to Defra and any ELMS Testing Trial schemes that you're involved with. So we'll crack straight on with the questions. And I know, Laura, you had a couple of questions in already from a couple of members before we even started today. I don't know whether you want to, if you can, let that particular member speak, if they were willing to.
Yeah.
Justin Spenlove and Tom Morrison got the questions, whether they want to ask the question directly.
Okay, just one moment.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll allow Tom Morrison to talk now. He's there.
Tom, you're muted, but you can ask a question if you go ahead.
I've written my question. Have you not got the question there written by me?
Well, we have. We thought you might like to ask it yourself.
No, don't. Oh, well, why don't you read it out, Russ? I can't find it.
Okay, Laura, go for it then.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
So Tom had a couple of questions. So today's civil servants are trained to focus on outcomes as opposed to activities for programmes such as ELMS. That's fine for some of the time, but under the mid-tier environmental stewardship, it was taken to ridiculous extremes. For example, all capital items have to be completed in the first 2 years of my 5-year contract, thus depriving me of any support for a period of 3 years for hedgerow restoration. So his question was, has this lesson been learned, and will such a silly idea be discontinued under ELMS?
I'm very happy to answer that.
Thanks, Jenny.
I don't think that they're at that stage yet, but I think that what what has been fed back to Defra robustly is these sort of asks and questions, particularly around the administration of the countryside stewardship. The countryside stewardship has got loads of brilliant options in it, but as you will have found, that it's a clunky tool, and as you say, it's ridiculous when it precludes people from being able to do things like hedge planting. So I think in the ELMS design, if we get it right, that there will be an opportunity for co-financing. So at the moment, there is an element of that happening already on your farm. So, for example, you know, if you want to do hedgerow management or you want to do the hedge planting, there may be other mechanisms that can support that investment. But certainly, I think there has been a big debate around capital, because if we give a lot of money from the ELM scheme to capital, there'll be less money for revenue. And what we want to make sure is people get paid for managing the land when we can facilitate capital from other sources more easily. But yes, I think in the answer is that we're all hoping that the new scheme will be much more sensible in its administration.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And then we had a question from Justin Spenlove. Do you want to read that out as well, Laura, just to save us time?
Yeah. So Justin said, why doesn't the ELM scheme put greater emphasis on two of the most fundamental design principles? One, generation / maintenance of diverse soil ecology across all land, not just margins. And two, the effective enforcement of the polluter pays principle.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think those are two, you know, if there were two things that I could put pressure on Defra to introduce, it would be polluter pays and more emphasis on soil. And I just think, you know, I suppose it's kind of a hot topic because the agriculture bill is going through Parliament again this week, but the devil is now in the detail, and we've got to put pressure on them to add the detail over the next 12 months or so into the secondary legislation. And I think this is where the likes of incentives for improving soil quality and health and biodiversity, as well as disincentivizing practices which cause harm, this is where we have to show them how that's possible. And I think that's where the Elm Testing Trials, as well as lots of other projects, I don't think they're not just looking at the Elm Testing Trials at the moment. I think they're looking all across the industry. And the more we can show them that it's possible to do this sort of stuff, the more likely it is to happen, I would say. Jenny, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because quite a lot of people obviously want the polluter pays principle, but it creates some immediate challenges for some conventional farmers. I think what we're wanting to try and do is create that as an objective and a transition to support all farmers into a better way of managing their soils because of all the reasons that we all know. I think that the ecological diversity is one of the things that we've discussed with Defra and Natural England around if you rewarded farmers for diversity, then actually that would be something that would incentivize people to have more diverse pastures or more diverse soils. But obviously studying mesofauna and soil ecology is a foundation for ecological recovery, but it's quite difficult to assess it in a detailed way. So what we've tried to do with the UK habitat mapping and the management codes, and where AgLand and CH and those sort of projects that we're working with are working, is could you attribute management to a functionality of the soil? Could you make an assumption that if you have a diverse herbal lay and you have rotational mob grazing, that is going to have a functionality that will deliver that? Because half of the trouble we have is as you say, the assessment parameters around being able to prove these sort of things. But yeah, it's definitely in the mix, but what you don't want is a huge amount of wasted resource trying to sort of pin down exactly the functionality to the detail. But with research, you want proxy measures that enable us to get on with it much more quickly, I think would be my view.
And just to piggyback on that question slightly for the two of you, what more could the sort of PFLA community do to help demonstrate the evidence for what's being done there, and who do we need to be telling? How can we share that information, evidence in your eyes at the moment?
Sorry, Jenny. I was going to say, I think we need kind of beacons of hope case studies now. We need to show Defra, you know, they don't really know what regenerative farming systems look like, so the more we can all work together to include case studies of farms that are, you know, supposedly doing all the right things that Defra want them to do, and show them how it's possible to add all these different kind of elements to this system of how the new scheme could work. So if you could, you know, take those case studies and do a UK HAB map and then do a sustainability assessment, send all that information to Defra, say, you know, this can totally work and farmers are on board with this. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing now. We need to be showing them what's possible and showing them that farmers do have an appetite to change. Because I do think there's a kind of underlying worry that, you know, whether it's from the unions or whoever, that there's going to be farmers who just want the kind of status quo. And actually, I don't think that's true. I think all farmers want to be the stewards of the land. They're just obviously worried about, you know, maintaining a business case and producing food in a sustainable way. So I think we've, you know, the more case studies, and I think there's some amazing case studies within the PFLA. So I'd say that's what we need to do.
Brilliant.
And I was just going to say quickly, if I may, Russ, that, you know, what we've been trying to do is, because we do recognise that Defra will listen to science. Again, as Adele says, you know, fantastic case studies. If anybody wants to be part of the research projects, we can feed all that up to all the academic forums that everybody's welcome to join who's academic. So, you know, we've set up conference calls between CH, Rothamsted, Oxford, you know, Aberdeen, Reading, all these different all these academic organisations. They are the ones that need to nail the attribution, so we can use the proxy measures, if that makes any sense. So we can actually start to say, you know, this is a brilliant farm, this is what it's doing, you know, and actually then once there's that evidence behind it, that research evidence behind it, then Defra can invest. That's the dream. But carbon, somebody asked a question about, you know, how are we managing to account for carbon. We're working with Becky Wilson, which I'm sure a lot of you know, around trying to get sort of like attributions of carbon to different habitat types, and soil obviously underpinning all of that. And so there's a lot of work within that area going on. But the soil is such a dynamic thing and so different in different places. There's a lot of work to be done in that. But because we've got, you know, big organisations behind this, so people like Ordnance Survey, you know, and people like CEH and all of that, that actually I think we've got a chance to do this, and so from the bottom up, which is really, really good. So hopefully, yeah, everyone's welcome to join, and we're keen to learn on what everyone else is doing too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jenny. Well, we'll see, I think, for the PFLA team to take away with yourselves and how we can keep up that dialogue. I'm sure members listening will be encouraged that we can try and work to case study some of what they're achieving. I'm conscious it's time, so there's no pressure if anybody's got to go, other commitments. As long as our speakers are happy, we've got a few more questions. We will carry on, but if you have to leave, that's fine. There will be the recording to catch up. So I'll just pop over to the Q&A session, which I'll just read out the questions we've had come up so far. From Anna Heaton, in an earlier slide, this is for Jenny, an earlier slide of Jenny's, it noted that BPS not reduced until 2024 to align with ELMS, but government farming for the future policy and progress update from Feb 2020 says BPS will reduce from 2021. Is there a recent change to delay the reduction in BPS?
No, it's a recommendation, but what we have done, and it has been championed by a lot of people now, and in fact I've fed it back to the National Audit Office yesterday in our assessment of Defra's performance we were asked to do with the National Audit Office. And I know that some key people like Julia Aglionby have taken this up as well, but we're trying to make the case that basic payment reduction doesn't happen until the commencement of ELMS because of the risk to our farm businesses. And there has been some murmuring within government that they might consider this, and we were told that if they do, there may be an announcement in June, but at the moment it's only a recommendation. It does say that on the slide, but we really hope they realise particularly value of food and reward farmers by taking that threat away from.
You're losing, coming in and out a bit there, Jenny. I'm not sure what's happening, but I think we got the message. I'll move on to the next question. One for you, Adele, from Dave Stanley. There's 10 metrics. He asked about energy and resource use. Fundamental cause of climate change is fossil fuel use. Fossil fuel use is relatively easy to measure, includes life cycle analysis, i.e. nitrate, transport for imported feed, etc. Fossil fuel use must be specifically reported to demonstrate progress towards 50% down by 2030 and net zero by 2050?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. It's fundamental, particularly for livestock farmers, because as you all know, we tend to get a bad press for methane, when actually it's really the fossil fuels that are causing the issue. And the more we can collect data on farms and understand as land managers where it is we need to change, whether that's reducing fossil fuel usage, using more renewables, etc., then how are we ever going to get better? So can't manage what you don't measure. So let's try and do it. The carbon calculator world is quite complicated at the moment, and it's something I'm trying to wrap my head around at the moment. How do we integrate a carbon calculator into an annual sustainability assessment without taking 5 days of someone's life? So it's an ongoing question, but 100% one that we need to get right, and definitely need to get right.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adele. I'm just trying to work through all these in order, so bear with me. They're coming from all directions. One from Rod Everett. I'm working on flood management with neighbouring farmers. Some of them won't implement NFM actions because they feel that they will lose out on future ELMS payments. For example, if you put in check dams now or restore blanket bog now, will that be recognised in ELMS when it starts? i.e., will it generate a sensible revenue stream? Really good question for anyone that's putting things in place already. Jenny, Adele, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can just say from a point of view of the discussions that have been had for the ELMS Advisory Board, that from the very beginning, that the main message was that we wanted to reward people for the existing, because there are over 1.5 million hectares of options on the landscape, and that farmers need to be rewarded. It does seem in the discussion paper, and Adele, I don't know whether you agree, but I think it's pretty well in the language that they say maintain, not just recreate, because I think that's such a terrible message, the idea that people think that for additionality, and it's something we've really all worked hard to try and sort of like make sure isn't in there, that it is about maintenance. So I would suggest that your neighbours, that they do carry on with their NFM stuff, because I can't see there be anything other than benefit for an enhanced environment under ELM.
Yeah, I agree. I think as Jenny said, the discussion document that's out at the moment talks about the kind of the date that you applied for various aspects of stewardship or interventions, and according to when you applied and when you started doing things, it will then phase into an ELM scheme at some point. But they don't talk about it ending and you stopping getting support for something you've done. So it's definitely something we need to keep pushing them on, but keeping fingers crossed that it's looking quite positive on that respect.
Brilliant, thank you. So Lisa Norton's just written us a comment and answer question, which I'll just read out. The ICF, we're not sure who the ICF are. The ICF have been commissioned to do a review of the ELMS projects and the key lessons coming from them under a number of themes, and Lisa is involved with this as our ADAS, and it should do a good job of drawing out key themes and issues. So that will be really interesting to hear, and perhaps Lisa, you can keep us updated on that. And Lisa's question is there a risk that mapping, like previous mapping, the FEPs and FERs, just encourages farmers to get money for not actively enhancing habitats? And the second question, how far down the UK hub hierarchy would we expect farmers to be able to go?
I can answer that. So two things. One thing is the fact that we suggested level 3, so that's taking it down to level 3 on the UK hub codes. But it's not just about the data. It is very much the view was the fact that, you know, where they set regulation, I think Adele and I were talking about this the other day, is that we think regulation will be set roughly about where it is. We can't see much change, but the opportunity is for under tier 1 for you to do that assessment and create that sort of verified data map, and then that land management plan assess, you know, what it is that you want to do that will improve soil and water. So a lot of the tier 1 thinking, as my understanding, was very much around sort of catchment sensitive farming infrastructure, but also some of the sort of like boundary grants and all of that sort of stuff. I think one of the things that I think would be really good is if we can create a similar justification for investment in that tier 1 from government, that actually that funding gets retained to the farm business, because I think that's been one of the fundamental problems with BPS, is that people have been allowed to spend it on whatever they like. And actually you can make the case that that £150 or equivalent actually then goes into that rural economy. If you then need to pay more people for doing more things that associate to your business, it creates that circular economy. So it isn't just about doing the mapping, but the mapping does seem to be a huge gap. And it seems to be that because of the fact that the information is so out of date, and because the farming system is so dynamic, that actually, you know, putting your land management forward so that we can then analyse that data to start to underpin delivering the 25-year environment plan, the United Nations sustainability goals, and analyse that information and make societal choices around food and, you know, development and housing and infrastructure and roads and all the other things. We can't do that without accurate data. So I think that's our view, but I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'm sure there's a slightly related question I saw somewhere. I don't know if you can see it, Laura. Was it Clyde said about measuring? Oh, here we are. How will carbon sequestration be proven, given we haven't been able to put the message across very well so far? And I know this is something dear to the PFLA's heart, is trying to get some numbers on carbon sequestration through pasture. I don't know if either of you got any comments on that one.
Yeah, it's something I don't think we have the golden answer to quite yet, but I do feel it's coming very soon, and there's lots of innovative technologies, probes and satellites and all this sort of thing that could potentially monitor carbon, which would be so exciting when it can happen. I've seen some really interesting things going on in New Zealand and Australia, which I think we could replicate if they get it right. But for the time being, I think we have to be pragmatic and rely on management practices as proxy for carbon sequestration. So, you know, mob grazing, regenerative grazing, cover cropping, etc. I think there's fairly good science on some of these things that show that it can increase carbon sequestration. But again, you know, actually, particularly with the mob grazing, just more research is needed, and I think it's coming. I've seen a few PhD proposals for people that are really looking into this now. So I'm optimistic that the carbon sequestration point will be answered sooner rather than later on some of these things.
Just to say also the fact that we're working with people who are trying to work on behalf of international corporations who want to invest in carbon offsetting. So linking the work that CH and Rothamsted and others are doing around the ecosystem service function, what we're also trying to do is create a platform through the land mapping and the stuff that we've been doing to say, well, if you are an international investor in carbon, a lot of them don't want to just invest in trees. They want to be more innovative. And I think that is happening, as Adele says, in other parts of the world where there is starting to become a market for carbon investors to, you know, carbon offsetters into regenerative farming. So I think that it's all so dynamic what's moving forward at the moment, but there's a lot of alignment of people trying to crack some of these nuts together. And I think there's language that needs to be shared between the academics who are very kindly helping to support us doing the attributions with the people who want to buy offsets to create that platform. And I think there's a lot of inspiring things happening at different levels with that sort of trading that's taking place. And we're going to try and make a suggestion that trading happens through a non-for-profit organisation at a county level, potentially like in Oxfordshire, where you get blended finance that is effectively filtered, so there's no sort of profiteering and it's all bona fide. But you know, I could see this, it could all fit together really well if we can get it right. So using existing farm tools, you know, adding in the sustainability matrix, being able to blend this finance and bring in these people who want to invest in different systems. It's possible. It's big, it's complex, but it is doable if we all play our part, which is what I think is really happening as part of the vision, isn't it, Adele? Everybody's working together, which is just such a wonderful thing. You know, so. That's
good. And I can just add to that the PFLA now has a research steering group. Some of the members of that are on this call, which is a really fantastic development. We've got a really dedicated group of volunteer members who are looking into some of these topics in more detail, right from animal welfare to biodiversity and carbon sequestration. So hopefully within the PFLA we can build further understanding as well and ensure that's shared with yourselves and Defra as well. So moving on, another question from Kate Massova Redwood down in Devon. Have anyone considered the short-term tenancy FBT culture and how landowners employing estate managers serve notice to quit, often without having a conversation about any of this? And also that with the current countryside stewardship, there is a clause that if the landowner requires the environmental practice to be carried out, the government scheme should not be applied for, and yet the estate managers try to insist the scheme is applied for and insist on certain practices and describe it as a win-win so they can increase the rent. We are National Trust tenants and this has happened to us. Any comments or experiences with that?
Yes, there are experiences of that. I think we've been trying to share what we're doing with the agricultural, is it the CVAVA, the Central Agricultural Valuers, and there was a really interesting national conference that we were able to present at, which is the British Institute of Agricultural Consultants, I think, because I think they have a real role to play in facilitating the agreements between the landowners and the tenants, and I think that it's a challenging one, particularly when you're a tenant of a big organisation like the National Trust, and now even the county council farms are getting these drivers about, what's the state of your natural capital, what are your tenants doing, are they going to be managing that land well? And we just feel there needs to be some better collaboration between that, because we've seen in the past where people have invested their own time and money as tenants into the land, and then the land's gone back out to tender at a higher value because it's actually in a better quality. So it doesn't drive that guardianship or investment from the tenant because they just think they're going to become a victim of it. So it is a real challenge. But I think that what we are seeing is that, which is slightly worrying in some ways, is that big landowners are wanting to see, yes, what their natural capital looks like, and actually how they might benefit from it, because I think they're so worried about the loss of PPS. And I think all we can do is hope that people from the Tenant Farmers Association, people like that on the ELMS Advisory Board, are making a really good case for this, and making that those become partnerships where the culture of the people who live somewhere is valued within that, and that there's a lot more that could be done. I mean, I work particularly on common lands, the rights of commoners and people who have been, generational tenants, needs to be very much part of that discussion and dialogue, in my view. But, I think at the end of the day, it'll come down to individual choices that are made between particular landowners and tenants, but we can certainly try and steer that argument and make the case for better collaboration and reward for the tenants.
Great, thank you. A question from Bill Grayson, commenting on Jenny's slides. Very glad to see more complex habitat mixes are included in your habitat mapping. How will this cope with the ongoing changes that we know can occur when nature is given more say in the outcomes?
Okay, so basically with UK HAB, that you can go down to 5 meters square. So in the sense that I think the idea is, if you're talking about things like allowing natural succession or rewilding and those sort of things, that this will enable to be able to do an annual assessment to show how that habitat type has changed, and I think that creates real opportunity. So you can literally stream with technology these days. We've been using Art Collector. We can walk around a piece of habitat, we can measure it, it'll digitize itself, it'll punch a hole in your field's shape and size. So I think that the successional vegetation and involvement of habitat types is the beauty of this mapping system. It shows you how that is evolving over time, and obviously if you look at the sort of like the opportunities for investment in tier 2 and collaboration and those land management plans, you could incentivize those changes to happen as appropriate for looking at the analytical gaps of provisioning and cultural regulating services such as pollinators or food provisioning or water or whatever, or soil recovery. So we haven't found any flaws with the system. The only thing that we think is that people like yourselves and other industry professionals will find management codes that aren't in there yet, and that Bill, who's been developing it, Bill Butcher from eCountability with UK HAB, has basically said, everybody come forward, tell us what it is you need in there, and as it starts to get used, there wasn't, for example, one for mob grazing, we've added one for mob grazing, and I think that's where the consultation could really sort of shape itself is that what other management codes do we need to get in there and add so we can start to give land management more function. But as you say, as a result of that, we'll get to grow learning about how habitats evolve and change and the soil health changes as those management codes, and that could obviously be researched and evaluated and create more proxy measures.
Brilliant, thanks Jenny. Well, I've just got 3 questions left which will get answered and try and wrap up by 6:30. So second one from Bill Grayson was to do with the carbon offsetting. Doesn't offsetting just allow bad practice elsewhere to continue as before? Maybe that's just a comment, but I don't know whether you've got any feelings or thoughts on that.
Only that I think this is where the cross-section of government support and private sector is actually really important, because I think the carbon offset market, the biodiversity offset market as well, represents real opportunity for farmers to benefit from some of these new funding streams. But like you say, then government has to be there to make sure that it isn't just meaning that bad practice happens on, you know, the other part of your estate, let's say. And actually that's a principle which should you know, really go across the whole of Elm. If you're doing something good on one part of the estate, but, you know, pouring on nitrogen and other inputs on the other part of the estate, should you be eligible for those payments in the first place? It's you really have to take a kind of integrated and holistic approach with this.
Great, thanks Adele. A question from Andy Bragg down in Devon. I'm on a 5-year countryside stewardship higher tier. The recording of crops, hedge maintenance, grazing techniques, grazing management, stocking rate and yields is being done under this scheme. It's onerous and hard work, but the information, data I have, and presumably other farmers have, could be important already. Can it be used for ELMS in the future to help my farm become part of ELMS? So I think Andy's basically saying he's got lots of data and information already. Can that be fed in some way?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, that's the beauty of UK Habits, is that a lot of the very clever people, techie people, have been doing the translation. So all of the stewardship options can all be translated into UK Hab, and all the way that you've done your FEPs and FERs as well. So, and as I say, if there's any missing, we can add them in. But at the moment, the exercise that we're doing with farmers is to ask them to sign up to the Land App or similar applications that function the same way, but Land App seems to be the best one that we're all working with Tim very closely. He's given a huge amount of support to me and Adele, and basically you can pull your RPA mapping data into the Land App. You can then upload your BPS and your CS options, and then you can translate that into UK Hab. So if Defra decide to use UK Hab, I mean, as I say, this isn't a done deal, but there do seem to be a lot of people who think this is a really good idea. As you say, Russ, that, you know, we are only one of quite a few trials, but we were lucky enough that we've done a lot very early, so that they are, you know, quite interested in the fact that we have delivered a lot. And I think that, you know, that there are real mechanisms here that could be beneficial. But yes, in answer to your question, that everything can be translated technically through using applications that exist and your existing options and mapping.
Okay. Brilliant. And a question from Julian Jones. Is it not very optimistic to think during the projected forthcoming 300-year recession, the funds from government will be available for all of what ELMS is talking about?
Well, I think it's, you know, it's actually a very kind of realistic thing to be concerned about, and I think this is why we need to collect as much data as possible on the hopefully good things that farmers are doing to make the case to the Treasury that they should continue to be supported. I mean, when you look at the budget for agriculture as opposed to the budget from the NHS, it's just minutely small. And actually, if we can make the case that producing kind of nutritious food, which can hopefully make the population a bit healthier, as well as regenerating the landscape and providing public goods, then, you know, surely it's a no-brainer that the Treasury continue to support agriculture at the level, and hopefully potentially more in future. But we need to shout about it quite loud over the next few years. Otherwise, it's a real risk that funding could be reduced.
And that's why we're trying to look at these dynamic procurement systems, because the argument post-COVID is there will be less money. But if that money is going to go to schools and hospitals, then obviously those schools and hospitals, if they could buy the food that we produce in the UK and that's underpinned by regenerative farming and delivering the land that's producing that food is delivering those public goods, then actually that dynamic procurement underpinned by regenerative agriculture could actually be transformative for food justice, food equality, and joined up delivery of government, statutory requirements. So that's why it's super exciting, but actually it's also quite challenging, because we know that's not an easy nut to crack. But we think a combination of, Adele's sort of, and the Sustainable Food Trust Matrix, and this idea that we can actually, it's in the Ag Bill that they will pay for these public goods. If we can create mechanisms that are verified by our brilliant academic community, that can then be simple, forward-facing in these practical measures around management, and actually get the government to buy that food because they're enabled to buy it because it is delivering against all those other services and duties, then that is a real ambition to have. And it's one we've probably all been looking at procurement for 15, 20 years, and we've all been looking at all of this stuff for such a long time. But actually this now is an emergency, a multiple emergency, and it may be that it's a time where people may listen to solutions that in other times they may have not really given the concentration and duty that it deserves.
Great, so there's some hope. And just a final question to you both, from me and on behalf of the PFLA. What more do you think we can do to help share the PFLA's experience and PFLA farmer experience with Defra through other ELMS tests and trials? What more can we do to be proactive as a community to get across what we can achieve?
You go down.
From my point of view, I mean, obviously I'm focusing on the metrics and measurement side of things and trying to create consensus amongst farmers as well as the food industry on what we should be measuring and how we should be communicating it. So obviously, the Pasture for Life certification is a fantastic kind of benchmark, hopefully, which we can build on. But actually within that, I'm sure there's some discrepancy about how, certain things are measured. Of course, soil carbon being one of them, sward density and diversity and all this sort of thing. So consensus amongst the pasture-fed movement about what they should be measuring and how they want to communicate that would be really helpful from my perspective in terms of influencing Defra on measuring change.
I would say also, in support of that, is that one of the things that we found frustrating on the ELMS Advisory Board is that we haven't been able to share very well between the other trials. As Adele said, we've been doing that sort of like externally because it's not been happening from the Defra end, even though I'm sure they would like to try. So what we've set up is we've set up a sort of like the ELMS Advisory Board that says just like a group outside of Defra. So all the people who are on the advisory board have said that they agree for there being this group that is actually going to be sort of like also on the advisory board. So what we could do is we could push all of the PFLA information through that advisory board group and share it with all the academic forum that we're setting up as well in association with that. Because I think, as I said at the very beginning, I think we're all learning from a lot of what you've been leading on for a good five years or 10 years or more. So I think it's vital, the research that you've done around nutritional quality, land management, innovation around the way that land is managed. The importance of livestock and getting those messages out is so important that actually we've got the mechanisms to communicate that. And I certainly would welcome, the PFLAs, being embedded within that shared learning, because, as I say, we're learning from you much of the time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. So just to finish, Laura, can I just ask you to launch the next question, which is just for everyone, just so we can get a bit of a feedback for these webinars, this being the first one. Hopefully you can see that, Laura. So just to ask you whether we've actually put this on the right time of day. This was we had a bit of guide suggesting 5 o'clock in the evening was a good time, but if you could just select what suits you, that would be great. I appreciate, however, that we have lost a few people, and they're probably the ones that would have voted that they would like it earlier, but it'd be useful just to get a bit of an indication, and perhaps, Laura, you can show the results of that when that comes up.
We're about half voted now, just one moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Hopefully we'll see that on the screen. If everyone's still there and paying attention. And just to say a big thank you to Adele and Jenny for giving up their time to tell us more about what they're involved with and help expose us to some of the work that's going on with the development of ELMS now. And as you both highlighted, there's some great opportunities for us to be more engaged as a PFLA community and help put across some of the great things that we're seeing on our farms. So thank you very much. Oh, and there we've got the results. So, okay, brilliant. So it was an ideal timing for everybody that's left on the call to start at 5 o'clock. So we'll bear that in mind with our future webinars. And regarding the future webinars, you should be getting emails shortly about next week's webinar about pasture pigs, which is quite exciting to bring together a conversation of farmers pioneering systems with pasture pigs. And then the following week, we're going to be having a virtual farm tour, fingers crossed if the tech works. So you'll be seeing that information come through on email. Do look out for that. And hope you've enjoyed this, found it useful, and a way of working under our current social distancing restrictions. And if nothing else, actually enabled us to get some information shared that we otherwise might not have. So thank you very much to everyone attending, and thanks again to Jenny and Adele.
Thank you, Russ, for organising. It's been really good.
Hopefully reasonably smooth considering the tech, but
thank you.
Brilliant. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Bye.